we're just about the end of our time. One last question for each of you. We've put a lot of challenges on the table today, a lot of opportunities to get this stuff right. What's one takeaway for folks in Washington, given what Washington can or can't do to help out? What's one takeaway that they should be focused on, that they should be thinking about? Cam?
Why do I always have to start? Start with Mark.
All right, we'll start with this.
Sorry, I'm not the moderator.
Okay, toss that ball back. Okay, so
Lateral.
yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation about leadership development. You know, we say great teachers, great leaders. I think we have to get deeper, and what does that mean to help support leaders? Like Cami said in the beginning, I am not from the policy world, so on that front, I don't know how policy could impact. How do you make sure those bare bones basics that happen in the school happen? But I think most of us have been talking about leadership development, instructional leadership, and anything that can make it stronger in those schools on the nuts and bolts of what makes the school work. If policy can do that, that would be amazing.
I think more flexibility to do the work that we need to do. Just as we've been speaking, each learning community is different, and we need to respect that and see what they need to grow and develop. Right now, it feels as if everything is a competition. And unfortunately, I'm in one of those districts that's just not large enough or have enough diversity to get attention. And so we're left dealing with the resources that the limited resources we have. However, if we were able to leverage the federal and state, just the categorical dollars, we would be able to focus on the work instead of dealing with compliance mandates that really restrict the type of leadership opportunities that we're beginning to see.
All right, Glenn, one quick example of the kind of how the compliance burden gets in the way. Just give us one very concrete example.
Title I regulations are really specific. You can only use the money for very specific types of activities or with specific students instead of generalizing it and using it for the good of all students and practitioners in the school. And so if we were able to do more, and that's just one limited example, there's tons of Title III, Title II. How do we use it more strategically?
Okay. John?
Hey, by the way, we follow you very closely. You seem to create less protest than we do, so we think we will follow you. We pay attention to you. Three quick things. One is do not move off the dime on the accountability. Because anything that happens, if we're not going to be held accountable for all youth and our like youth, we're going to have, that's going to walk backwards. This is going to sound like heresy, but this is my belief in watching the last 4 or so years. If we could move away from competition to incentive. So rather than competing to incent, I actually think you could get the ball further down the field. And that's a delicate shift. So prize theory versus kind of movement for the general. And lastly, let's strike out on student-weighted funding formula. Distribution of whatever funds we have based on the need of youth. We'll have an equity conversation versus an equality conversation. And I would argue 2 policy changes and a policy shift.
Two big things. One, research, IES. One, focusing on proof points around the country. Great places have done wonderful work for us to learn from what they've done. Looking at assessments, curriculum, etc., especially around emerging literacy, I think would be amazing for us as school districts. 2, funding, looking at the reorganization of ESEA, looking at title dollars, making that much more flexible for districts to align what we know works and taking the funding and making that work, not focusing on programmatic sort of allocations like Reading First, etc. For us to really build that kind of capacity with our folks, I think would be really fundamental in supporting the workforce.
To quote my dear friend Dick Elmore, I think we need to hold we hold things tight that should be loose, we hold things loose that should be tight. And specifically to tie in the other comments, what should be tight, I agree, are the standards and the accountability measures, and they need to be much more sophisticated. And we need to have a new generation of ways to measure it that acknowledge gains, that look at our lowest performers, and that do things that we've learned as a community work much better than the blunt instrument of proficiency. So hold that tight, and then hold loose, how we get there, so we aren't filling out 14 forms about Deanie school or a Deanie school, or whether or not we use X number of dollars, the SES provider, stop the madness on things that come with restrictive funds like Reading First and the SES providers, et cetera, but hold very tight the piece around accountability, or else we're going to go back to 1,000 flowers blooming and a real lack of equity and transparency about that lack of equity.